grandfather had died alone in the kitchen. Nobody realized it until the mail started spilling off the porch in neat little slides. A neighbor finally noticed the stack and called the county. By the time the sheriff broke in, the old man had been gone for days, maybe longer. Paige kept telling me she wasn't up for going inside by herself. She'd say it on the phone in this brittle voice, like she was afraid I'd think she was being dramatic. I didn't. I understood exactly why she didn't want to set foot in there. When we finally reached the clearing, the cabin looked worse than I'd expected. It leaned hard to one side, like the whole thing was trying to sink into the ground. Half the shingles were missing. A busted porch rail hung by a single nail. I parked behind her Corolla, and for a long minute we just sat there, with the engine ticking as it cooled. Neither of us moved. It was the middle of the afternoon, but the trees pressed in so tight that the click ticking as it cooled. Neither of us moved. It was the middle of the afternoon, but the trees pressed in so tight that the click... We split up without really talking about it. She started on the living room, dropping old mail and papers into trash bags. I walked through to the kitchen. The linoleum was cracked and peeling at the corners, and there, right by the stove, was the dark stain. I didn't look at it longer than I had to. I opened a few cabinets just to be thorough. Inside, I found boxes of cereals so old the cardboard had gone soft, and glass jars full of what might have been preserves once. I didn't touch any of it. In the hallway, I peeked into the bedroom. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with more jars. Some had labels in spidery handwriting: okra, beans, peaches. Most of the contents had collapsed into a grayish mush that made my stomach turn. One jar held a pail at the door. I hauled an armload of blankets outside and dumped them in a pile. Every time I went back in, the air felt thicker, like it was pressing on my chest. Paige didn't say much. Every so often I'd catch her glancing down the hallway, her eyes fixed on the closed bedroom door. Once I asked her what she was looking at, and she just shook her head. A couple hours passed like that. We worked in silence. The only sounds, the rustle of trash bags and the occasional creak of floorboards under our feet. When the light started to fade, I looked at my watch and felt my throat tighten. "We need to check the cellar before it's dark," I told her. She froze, her hand still buried in a box of papers. "He never let me down there," she said quietly. "He used to tell me it wasn't safe." I tried to keep my voice light, even though it came out strained. "Not safe how?" She just shrugged, but her shoulders were locked up near her ears, like she was bracing for something to hit her. I decided not to push. I went to the back of the kitchen and pulled open the cellar door. The hinges groaned. Cold air spilled up around my ankles. My flashlight beam wavered as I stepped onto the stairs. They were steep and narrow, built out of unfinished boards. My boots left damp prints behind me. About halfway down, the smell hit me, like wet fur mixed with something sour and rotting. I tried to breathe through my mouth. The cellar floor was just packed dirt. My light picked out a big wooden work table, the surface gouged with dozens of shallow cuts. Iron hooks dangled empty above it, gently swaying as if someone had just brushed past. On the far wall, a row of shelves held more jars. The liquid inside looked yellowish, and the things floating in it didn't resemble anything I recognized. I was moving closer, thinking I'd just take a quick look so I could say I'd done it, when I heard footsteps on the floor above me. Slow, deliberate. "Paige?" I called. No answer. My heart felt like it was trying to crawl up my throat. I climbed the stairs fast, 2 at a time. When I reached the top, the door swung shut in my face. The latch clicked home with a dull snap that made my chest go cold. "Hey!" I smacked my palm against the door so hard my skin stung. "Paige, open the door." Her voice came through, muffled and shaky. "Elowen, there's someone outside." My mouth went dry. "What do you mean, someone?" "He's standing in the trees." I pressed my forehead to the wood. "Just open the door, okay? He's watching me." Then I heard her step away. "Paige." "Nothing." I swallowed, trying to keep my hand steady on the flashlight. My beam wobbled across the dirt floor. Behind me, Something shifted. I turned, and for a second I thought my brain was playing tricks on me. A shape uncurled itself from behind a stack of burlap sacks. Thin limbs, too long to belong to any animal I knew. One arm stretched out, and the elbow bent the wrong way with a little pop. I backed up until my spine hit the stairs. My breath was coming in sharp, broken gasps. It raised its head. My flashlight caught smooth skin pulled tight over a skull. No eyes, no mouth, just blank, pale flesh. It began to crawl toward me, dragging itself inch by inch. Each movement made a soft, sucking sound. I threw my shoulder against the door. Wood splintered. I hit it again and again. On the third slam, it flew open so fast I stumbled into the kitchen. Paige stood by the table, staring past me, her eyes huge. "Where is he?" I gasped. Her voice was flat. "He walked back into the trees." I didn't wait for more. I grabbed her wrist, practically dragging her across the porch. My truck was right where I'd left it. I didn't look over my shoulder until we were halfway down the driveway. Through the windshield, I saw a shape slip between the trees. Tall, thin, moving in a way I couldn't even process. Paige let out one strangled sob and clamped her hand over her mouth. I pressed the gas pedal down hard, gravel spitting out behind the tires. We didn't say another word until we hit pavement. I was 32 when I finally decided to spend a full week alone in the most remote stretch of the Blue Valley Range I could reach without hiring a guide. I'd been camping for years, plenty of long weekends, a couple of week-long treks, but something about going completely off-grid kept nagging at me. Like it was the only way I'd ever really prove to myself that I could handle absolute solitude. I couldn't quite put that feeling into words, but it settled in my chest and wouldn't leave me alone. I started planning a month ahead. Every evening after work, I'd spread out my new topographic maps across the kitchen table. I'd run my finger along old forestry roads and look for places with no maintained trails, nothing marked except an occasional stream or an elevation line. One night, I even dug out an old pamphlet I'd picked up at a ranger station years ago. It had a faded cover showing a black and white photo of some cabin ruin and a heading that said something like Unrecorded Hollows of the Blue Valley. The pages were warped with moisture, but there was just enough detail to get me curious. I didn't want to leave anything to chance. I ordered a new tent that claimed it could stand up to surprise downpours without leaking. I bought extra batteries, restocked my little first aid kit, and added a small hand crank radio. The radio was mostly for my peace of mind. I'd never used one, but it felt like a good last resort if something went sideways. I even packed 3 different knives, which in hindsight sounds a little dramatic, but at the time it felt like exactly the right amount of caution. Before I left, I called my brother Matt. I made a point of sounding casual, though I could tell he was skeptical. I told him I'd be out at least 6 days, maybe 7, and he shouldn't worry if I didn't check in right away. He sighed and said something about how I was basically asking to star in my own missing persons documentary. I laughed it off, even though a little part of me wondered if he had a point. The morning I left, I got up before dawn. My old Subaru looked like it was sagging under the weight of all my gear. The back was so crammed with supplies, I had to wedge my it. Then, I set off. That first day was exactly what I'd hoped for. I had on my pack and just watched it burn. The quiet was different from anything I had experienced before. No hum of distant cars, no planes overhead, not even other campers' voices echoing through the trees. Just the occasional click of a branch dropping somewhere I couldn't see. Dinner was a pouch of freeze-dried stew I'd been putting off trying. It tasted like warm salt, with a few chewy lumps thrown in for variety. Still, it was filling enough that I felt drowsy by the time the sky went dark. I made a few notes in my journal about the route I'd taken and which game trails might be worth exploring later. When I finally crawled into the tent, I rested my hand on the handle of my belt knife. Not because I was scared, at least that's what I told myself, but because it was a habit I'd picked up on solo trips. A little reassurance in the dark. The second morning, I woke up to a thin layer of mist curling low across the ground. It was so pale it made everything look like it'd been dusted with flour. I brewed coffee that tasted like burnt plastic and walked a slow perimeter around the campsite to get my bearings. The ridge sloped down into a narrow gully that felt like it was inviting me in. I kept telling myself I'd just peek over the rise, but after lunch I decided to follow it properly. I picked my way down almost a mile. The deeper I went, the more certain I was that no one had set foot there in decades. Fallen trees lay across the gully like barricades. Once, I spotted a length of rusted chain half buried in the leaf litter. A little farther on, I found a small pile of bones picked clean. They looked too small to be anything but a raccoon or a fox. I stood there a while, turning my head to listen for movement, but the gully was dead quiet. On the way back, something caught my eye. A patch of fresh-looking dirt off to the right of the trail, turned up in an uneven mound. At first, I thought it might be a burrow, but the hole was too wide and shallow for any animal I could think of. I felt this crawling unease in my neck, but I told myself it was just imagination. I didn't go any closer. That evening, I stayed up later than usual, feeding the fire stick after stick, watching the edges of the clearing for any sign of movement. When the last logs crumbled into a soft bed of embers, I finally crawled into the tent. My eyes burned from staring at the flames too long. I don't know when exactly I woke up. All I remember is the moon was bright enough to paint every branch in silhouette against the nylon. For a moment, I couldn't figure out where I was or why my chest felt so tight. Then I heard it. A voice, low and close, said my name. Not a shout, not a question, just spoken, steady, like whoever it was knew exactly where I was lying. My throat closed up. I tried to swallow, but nothing moved. My ears rang so loudly I thought they'd drown out everything else. The voice didn't come again. Eventually, I convinced myself it had to be a dream. I lay there, eyes wide open, until dawn began to creep through the trees. When the light finally came, I unzipped the tent in short jerks, expecting to see footprints or some sign I wasn't alone. Nothing was out of place. No broken branches, no scuffs in the soil. Just the same clearing I'd pitched my tent in. I spent the whole day trying to distract myself, collecting more wood, fishing in the stream, sorting and resorting my gear. But as the light started to fade again, I felt this slow pressure in my chest, like the trees themselves were leaning closer. I couldn't shake the idea that staying another night was a mistake. That evening, I made the fire larger than before. I dragged every dry branch I could find into a pile and fed the flames until they were throwing light halfway up the boulders behind me. I settled against one of those boulders with my knees drawn up, thinking if I stayed awake, maybe I'd feel in control. It was a nice theory. At some point, I must have nodded off. I woke to the embers fading to dull red, the cold pressing through my jacket. For a few seconds, I thought maybe the night would pass without incident. Then, behind the boulder, I heard breathing, slow, steady, deliberate. Like whoever it was didn't care if I heard them as long as I didn't turn around. My hands started to tremble so badly, I almost dropped the flashlight.
If you have tried multiple oral antidepressants,
I sat there, paralyzed, staring at the fire's last glow. My legs went numb from not moving. I couldn't bring myself to look over my shoulder. The breathing didn't change. It never sped up. It never slowed down. Just stayed exactly the same until the first gray light came through the trees. When it finally stopped, I felt like I'd been hollowed out. I stood up on legs that barely worked and broke camp in record time. My pack was a tangle of straps and half-zipped pockets. I didn't care. I just needed to be moving. I hiked hard, barely pausing to drink water. Every time I glanced behind me, I was sure I'd see someone stepping into view. The trail felt narrower, like the trees were pressing in. My breath came in short gasps I couldn't control. About a mile from the trailhead, I stopped so fast, my boots slipped in the damp leaves. In the middle of the trail was a single boot print, bigger than mine by at least 2 sizes, pressed deep into the soft earth. No other prints led up to it. None led away. I didn't take a picture. I didn't study it. I just started running. When I reached my car, I locked the doors before I even set my pack in the passenger seat. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the keys twice before I got them into the ignition. I didn't look back until I'd driven 10 miles, until the trees thinned out into pasture land. That was the last time I ever camped alone. I spent that summer working for a little conservation outfit out in the southern Blue Ridge. It wasn't exactly a glamorous job. Most days it was just me, a clipboard, and a lot of sweating through my shirt while I tried to figure out whether a patch of moss was the same species I'd cataloged 2 weeks earlier. The group was small, just 6 of us, and everyone took turns hauling gear, updating old surveys, and driving into places so remote you'd wonder why anyone bothered keeping them on the official maps. The old-timers called these parcels forgotten tracks, which always sounded a little dramatic. Time the sun hit it. My supervisor, Elena, handed me the file and said something like, "Good luck. This one's a black hole." She wasn't joking. Half the papers inside were copies of copies, blurry and half illegible. The last field report was from 1978. Some guy named Brooks had typed it up, and it was basically just a list of trees, rough counts of native plants, and this single line tacked on at the end: "Old dwelling remains. Advise caution." That was it. No explanation, no follow-up. I remember thinking maybe he'd just been spooked by a raccoon or a bear den. I wish that's all it had been. I signed out a GPS unit, one of those clunky gray models that loses signal if you so much as sneeze, and grabbed a fresh stack of survey sheets. Then I loaded my pack into the truck and set out. The road out there was the worst I'd ever driven. The gravel thinned the farther I went until it was just a pair of ruts packed into clay. There were stretches where the weeds in the middle were taller than my bumper. It took me almost 2 hours to get past the last mailbox, and by then my nerves were already wound tight. Eventually, the road just quit pretending to be a road. I pulled over where it dissolved into a mess of grass and broken branches. When I stepped out, everything went quiet in a way I didn't like. I did a slow turn, trying to spot some landmark, and finally saw a line of fence posts that looked more like termite buffets than anything built by humans. About 8 feet up a sycamore trunk was a warped board with a burned-in 14. That was my only confirmation I was in the right place. I remember thinking it felt like the start of a bad joke, like the punchline was waiting somewhere past those trees. I shouldered my pack, adjusted the compass clip to my strap, and stepped over the collapsed fence. Within maybe 20 steps, the road disappeared behind me completely. The trees were massive, trunks as thick as old silos, branches tangled so high I couldn't see where they ended. The first hour was a steady climb. I stopped every so often to scribble down notes. Patches of trillium, the odd mushroom cluster, a tiny frog that nearly jumped into my boot. My GPS kept flashing in and out, but by then, I was used to it. I trusted the compass more than anything. I was making my way along the side of the ridge when I noticed a break in the undergrowth. Just a little dip in the slope. I shifted around to get a better look and saw the edge of a stone foundation tucked into a hollow. It looked so out of place that for a second I thought I was imagining it. I knew I should have just marked the spot and kept moving, but there was this feeling, like the place was waiting on me specifically, like it had something it wanted to show. It sounds ridiculous, but that's how it felt. So I climbed down. Moss was growing in thick green patches along the inside walls. I stepped over and started brushing leaves aside with my boot. Every little thing I uncovered felt like another piece of a story that didn't add up. There were glass shards that might have been a window once, a spoon with the bowl crushed almost flat, and a lunchbox so faded you could barely make out the cartoon animals. Some kind of bear family smiling under a sun. I crouched down and flicked the latch open. Inside was a scrap of blue cloth, wadded tight, and a handful of marbles. The colors were still bright, swirls of red and yellow and blue that looked almost fresh. I don't know why, but that made the back of my neck prickle. I was crouched there, turning a marble over in my palm, when I heard it. It was a slow, deliberate shift, like something heavy moving its weight from one foot to the other. I froze. My first thought was bear. My second thought was that no bear moves that quietly. I stood up, heart doing this nervous little flutter in my chest. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees. Nothing. Just trunks and shadows. I told myself it had to be an animal, but the thought didn't settle right. My skin felt too tight, like it was waiting for something. I stepped back over the wall and moved around the edge, looking for tracks. That's when I heard the second sound, higher up the slope. A low branch cracking, then a soft thud. I called out, trying to sound casual, but my voice came out higher than I liked. Hey, just a conservation survey down here. Nothing answered. I took a few steps uphill. There was a tulip poplar standing alone, bark pale like old bone. I leaned to look behind it, hoping, really hoping, to see nothing at all. And that's exactly what I saw. No animal, no person. But the ground was marked. A clear boot print pressed into the leaf litter. The heel was dug in, like whoever left it pushed off in a hurry. I can't really explain what flipped in me right then, but it was like something inside me locked up and refused to budge. I needed to get out. I turned and started back down the slope. My breathing had gone thin and fast, and every step felt like it took twice as much effort. The GPS was dark, the screen blank. I clutched it anyway, because it was something to hold on to. Going back, everything felt off. The trees looked tighter together, the shadows thicker. I kept glancing over my shoulder, sure, I'd see someone or something following me. About halfway to where I thought the fence line had to be, I heard the voice. Come back. It was quiet but clear. A cracked whisper that sounded like it was coming through old radio static. I stopped cold. My ears strained for any other noise. Nothing. Then it came again, closer. Come back. My hands went clammy. I took a step back, then another. I was trying to convince myself it was a trick of the wind, but I knew better. The third time it spoke, something inside me just quit pretending. I bolted. I didn't care how much noise I made. My pack slammed into my back with every step. Branches caught my shirt and scraped my arms, but I didn't slow down. I barreled through a stand of rhododendron, not caring if I was heading in the right direction anymore. My legs burned, and my breath came ragged, but I couldn't make myself stop. When I finally stumbled to a halt, I was shaking so bad, I had to grab a tree to stay upright. I bent over, breathing in quick gasps. I looked around, hoping something would look familiar. It didn't. I swallowed, trying to think straight. If I kept going downhill, I'd hit the road eventually. That was all I needed to focus on. One step at a time. I started moving again, slower this time, trying to be quiet. The woods felt like they were pressing closer with every step. After what felt like an hour, I saw a strip of light ahead. It didn't look real at first, just a pale line between the trunks. I picked up my pace, then broke into a run. Some part of me was convinced if I didn't get there fast enough, it would vanish. I burst out of the trees, stumbled onto the road, and nearly fell to my knees. My truck was sitting right where I'd left it, weeds brushing the bumper. I forced myself to look back. I don't know why. Maybe some last stupid need to be sure. At first there was nothing, just shadows and trees. Then something stepped into the open. It was tall, dressed in an old canvas coat, dark stains all down the front. I couldn't see a face. It raised one arm, slow and deliberate, and pointed back into the woods. I didn't wait.
My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my mother, Samra, and to my origin. Every drop, a new inspiration.
I climbed into the truck with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The key slipped out of my fingers twice before I got it in. When the engine finally turned over, I backed up so fast the tires sprayed gravel. When I got back to the station, I turned in the GPS and my notes without saying a word about what I'd seen. I never set foot in Track 14 again. I was 23 when I somehow convinced myself it was a good idea to help my uncle clean out an old hunting cabin he'd inherited way out near the Tennessee-North Carolina line. He'd been sick for months and couldn't make the trip himself, so he called me up one evening and said it would be easy. Just drive out there, pack up a few boxes, bring back anything that looked worth keeping. He didn't mention how far gone the place was, or that the road would turn into something you wouldn't even call a road by the end, or that I'd be on my own for hours with no cell signal, no neighbors, no anything. I remember leaving my little duplex before dawn. My backpack was propped on the passenger seat with a thermos of coffee I never got around to drinking. For the first few hours, it felt like a normal trip. Flat highways, a few semis roaring past in the dark, exits spaced out miles apart. But as soon as I turned off onto Route 212, the pavement got sketchier. At first, it was just cracked asphalt with weeds poking up through the seams. Then it turned to gravel that pinged against the undercarriage every time I hit a rut. After that, the gravel gave up altogether, and I was left creeping along a single dirt track, barely wider than my SUV. The trees got denser the farther I went. Big old poplars and maples leaning so close I felt like they were trying to shut me out. Every so often I'd pass something half-rotted into the ground. An old fence line, a rusted oil drum, the ribs of a barn caved in on itself. The smell out there was this mix of damp leaves and something musty, like wet wool left too long in a basement. By the time I reached the clearing, I had that prickly feeling at the back of my neck, the one you get when you're convinced you're being watched, even though you're alone. I cut the engine and just sat there gripping the wheel, telling myself I was overthinking it. The cabin looked smaller than I'd pictured from my uncle's description. It was squat, with a roof so warped I could see daylight between some of the shingles. The porch leaned forward on one side, and I had this stupid thought that if I stepped on the wrong board, the whole thing would tip over. The yard wasn't really a yard, just a patch of matted brown leaves and dead grass, with ridges rising up all around like the hills were trying to keep it hidden. I got out, stretched my back until it cracked, and tried the front door. The knob felt gritty under my palm, but it turned easy enough. The second I stepped inside, the smell nearly made me gag. Stale smoke layered over rotting wood and something sharp and sour that made the back of my throat itch. I flipped the switch by the door out of habit. Nothing, no flicker, no hum, just dead silence. I stood there a second, letting my eyes adjust, and spotted a squat kerosene lantern sitting on the counter. I struck a match and lit the wick. The little flame wavered in the glass, throwing a pale glow across a cramped kitchen. The linoleum was cracked all over, and there were these dark stains on the walls that looked too old to be water damage. I tried not to look too hard. I figured the faster I worked, the sooner I could leave. I started with the cabinets. Most were empty, aside from mouse droppings and a couple rusted cans so old the labels had peeled off. Every time I reached into a shelf, dust puffed into my face and stuck in my nose. I found a set of mismatched plates my uncle wanted, plus some heavy mugs that still had a faint brown ring where someone had left coffee to dry. I packed everything in a box and set it by the door. The place was so quiet. Every creak of the floor felt like someone stepping up behind me. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see a face in the doorway. At one point, I brushed against a curtain, and the fabric was damp under my fingers. I wiped my hand on my jeans. and tried to focus on what I was doing. After about 2 hours of sorting through cabinets and drawers, I felt like my head was stuffed with cotton. My back hurt from hunching, and the lantern's little pool of light made everything outside it look darker. I figured I could use a minute to clear my head, so I stepped out onto the porch. That's when I noticed the wire. It ran between two trees, maybe 20 feet out. At first, I thought it was just an old clothesline, but when I looked closer, I saw the little bones. They were bleached white, each one tied to the wire with strips of cloth. The bones were so small I had to squint to guess what they came from. Rabbit, maybe? Or something even smaller? They hung there in a neat line, swaying a little in the breeze I couldn't feel. I walked over, telling myself I was just curious. The cloth had symbols drawn in dark ink, plain shape.
Shoot, okay. Maybe some music, because that one was long. Okay. Maybe some music, because that one was long.
What's new? I didn't even know I was even asleep till you said my name.
Don't worry about it.
Anybody calling me still? No. Okay. Yeah.
Here it is.
Faint headlights on a lonesome street. Soft wind hums a worn out beat. Hums a worn out beat. Moonlight go wide, but you're not walking by my side. Every mile, every sign brings me back. What was mine? Love still lingers in the air, but I turn. You're not.
Oh, you're good. You're fine.
Faded letters on the old barn door. Footsteps echo, but not yours. Silence sings songs we knew. Now the night just feels so blue. makes the pine trees sing. Memories dance in the fire's light, like echoes lost in the quiet night. Winds may change, rivers may run, but I still wait for what's undone. Every sunset, every spark still keeps your name inside my blueprints faded in the red clay dust. Two hearts once strong now turn to dust. You took the road, left me behind. Now I chase ghosts in the Georgia. Winds may change, rivers may run, but I still wait for what's undone. Every sunset, every spark still keeps your name inside my heart. Maybe time will dim the flame, but I'll still smile when I hear your name. So then I'll stand where we once lay, watching fire
What are you
turn.
doing, Andy?
What?
What are you doing?
Huh?
What are you doing?
Playing music? Cleaning?
Oh, what's for supper?
Oh, I have no idea. I hadn't thought that far.
That sounds good.
Probably just leftovers.
Yay. Hey, what do you think about
Hmm?
music?